Hello, folks. I'm sure you've all been distracted by world events, much like I have in the last few weeks. And in light of the internets of the world heating up with information security concerns, getting together and sharing information is going to become all that much more important. So we're finally gearing up with our first real in-person conference on May 18th to 20th and doing training courses in person May 14th to 17th, but we'll be doing also a full complete hybrid conference. It means remote, on-site, local and remote, everything streaming to everybody else, have Pontoon competitions, the usual, and hopefully back to normal interaction of people face to face. And with that, one of the things I've been slacking on a couple of things while we've all been distracted by the very noisy environment of the information security spectrum in the world these days. I've had to release this video with our keynote speaker, who I'm happy to announce is Natalie Silvanovich from Project Zero. She's going to be giving us an interesting overview of some of her research areas, which is also what she talked about within this interview that we've done originally in our continuing exploit development Hall of Fame series that we first started for the Pontoon streams and PACSEC last year. And so without further ado, here's this interview. And the other thing I have been slacking off while we've been distracted with the world is I haven't switched over the prices to the March prices yet for CanSecWest. So you can race me. I've got to do that sometime in the next couple of days, but it's kind of your last chance to get that earliest and lowest discounts on either online or in-person tickets. And if anything comes up, we will give full online access to anyone who has in-person tickets, and we'll be refunding the online portion or the in-person portion of that ticket should anything happen. But right now, with the COVID numbers going the way they are right now, and it looks like travel is slowly resuming, world events permitting, I think that we are getting back to pretty much a lot of the same old normal with as far as our in-person interactions, and I'm really looking forward to that conference in May. So without further ado, here's our interview with Natalie. Good morning, and how are you?
Great.
As introduction for folks, this is our Exploit Hall of Fame, where we interview and talk to folks who really moved the needle in terms of exploit research and trying to really archivally document some of the history and knowledge of all the changes that happen in this quickly moving area. So let's get your fancy title out here. And so I gave you a little bit of indication, sort of the way we're trying to walk through this. The first question is really simple. Give us your origin story, Uncle Natalie or Aunt Natalie, and how did we wind up here after so many years? What dragged you into this field, and tell us a little bit about how your career developed.
So I think compared to a lot of people in this space, I had a fairly traditional career path. So it started off, I got a little bit interested in security in high school. I was doing a science fair project and I started thinking about computer viruses, and ended up doing this project where I implemented the very, very flawed idea of writing a computer virus that would get rid of all the other computer viruses. That's a terrible idea. Don't do that.
Mm-hmm. The fix it everything worm. Lots of people have gotten in trouble for those, haven't they?
Oh, I know. And even back then, I knew well enough not to set it free. But I did get my project done. So after that, I went to university. I did electrical engineering, and I'm looking at the co-op job posts. That's what they call internships in Canada. And
yeah,
I see post for a junior hacker. And I'm like, wow, that is so amazing. So I ended up taking that job and working there for most of my university, and then staying at the same company for 5 years. And that's really how I learned to hack. It was at BlackBerry, and my job was basically to hack their mobile phone and find bugs so they could be fixed. So that was really cool. I learned most of it from other people who did this stuff professionally.
I actually remember most of that. That early BlackBerry security team was all rock stars. Actually, you guys had it was actually a kind of a seminal moment. A lot of really talented folks kind of came out of that environment. It was kind of funny, the history of that. If you were to draw that one on a map, there'd be a lot of connections there. So, kind of give us a little bit of walkthrough of what everybody's got their own little focus and areas they look at in security, because nobody can really know the whole breadth of it. Kind of walk us through where what has drawn your interest over the years.
So I guess when I started off, kind of my biggest interest was browsers and what I would call VMs and interpreters. When I started working on mobile devices at BlackBerry and on the Android security team, I think that was an area that I was really interested in. And I spent a lot of time on that in Project Zero. I found a lot of Adobe Flash bugs and bugs in browsers. Although recently I've started looking at other aspects of browsers as well. And this is how I kind of got on to my new interest, which is messaging applications and video conferencing. I happened to be looking at Chrome and noticed the Webrtc video conferencing library, and I was just like, wow, this looks really interesting. And then I looked at every other application that uses it, and I'm like, wow, this is like way more interesting than I thought. So I think video conferencing and also other remote attack surfaces of messengers has kind of become my new interest lately.
Yeah, that's kind of you kind of hit that one of the crux and pivot point too. Yeah, everybody was like starting to go, hey, look, there's this Webrtc thing. Let's start to build virtual conference apps or whatever it is on it right around the time when you really started to poke on it. So it was the right shove at the exact right moment there that I think really moved a lot of things. That was seminal, I think, is a good word for it. So that was pretty cool. I mean, actually, I want to ask you lots of questions about the Webrtc stuff, because that stuff fascinates me too. It's the underpinnings of what we're recording with this here right now. That's all just a layer on top of Webrtc, where it's become such a fundamental linchpin. I'm going to ask you more questions about the story for that one, but let me go back to just before we get to there. Let's rewind the clock a little bit I actually just finished up an interview with another of your Google Zero project team members, and Project Zero itself has been such a fundamental force. I mean, it's this. I'm trying to remember the words Halvar used to describe it. It's this very implausible, unlikely thing that's so important that's happened there. Tell me a little bit about your experiences there with the team, and you guys have literally moved so many important things on the internet, and it's been very fundamental to security. Tell me some anecdotes. Tell me some fun, interesting stories, some things that people should learn from behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's such a broad question. I'm having
it
trouble.
Okay. Let me pick one out for you. Okay, give me the funniest story of a vulnerability search. What's the funniest vulnerability you remember you guys hit across? I mean, maybe ridiculous, easy, ridiculously powerful, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, at least for me, some of the most ridiculous and surprising bugs have been the ones I've worked with Tavis Ormandy on. He just has a talent for kind of finding the weirdest, most unexpected attack surface. So I remember we worked on this FireEye one. He managed to get a FireEye appliance, and we discovered that it had this Tavis discovered that it had this Java decompiler in there that was completely, like, in the documentation said oh, this executes the code while it decompiles it, don't use it. But of course, it was doing that on the network interface. Also, there was the MP engine bug, which it was in Windows Defender. And what I found interesting about that one is once again, Tavis found the surface and I started looking at the VM, and once we find it, it's almost like, where can we send this? We were like seriously concerned about, crashing their mail backend or any number of their servers, because literally everything gets scanned with Windows Defender and like you don't know what it's going to do.
That, yeah, actually I remember that that interpreter bug. It was like a total the derp is strong here moment. So let's change gears a little bit. I mean, one of the ideas of this whole series is to kind of take advantage of your many years of expertise and bug hunting. What kind of advice would you have for people who are just starting their career and the approach to finding vulnerabilities? There's the vulnerabilities themselves, but there's a mindset. There's some. What advice do you have for people who want to power up their bug hunting capabilities?
Yeah, I think like the first piece of advice I would give to someone is figure out what you're interested in and look at what you're interested in. Because I feel like some of the most interesting bugs I've found have been in things where I'm like, wow, I just can't stop looking at this. I'm so interested in how it works. So if you can find something like that, really steer into your interests, I think that helps. Other than that, I feel like a lot of people give this advice, but spend a lot of time looking at bugs that other people find and see if you can figure out how they work. But also, don't be afraid to look at new things either. Because like a lot of the bugs I have found have been like, I'm just going to ignore what everyone's done so far and just like look at this thing and see if I can find bugs. So I think there's a good balance there.
So let's I'm not going to let you get away until we talk about two things particularly. I want to hear more stories and what's the background is for the messaging bugs, the iOS, of all of the stuff that you've such a long record of things, the one-click messenger, the whole research involved behind that. I'm a little fascinated to the story of how you guys found that, and I'm also would love, just because of sheer significance, love to hear your opinion about the whole area of the Webrtc attack surface. And so let's start first one. Tell me about the messaging bugs. Tell me about that whole saga.
Yeah. So I think if you look at the broad scope of remote mobile bugs, it's actually quite interesting in that, when I started my career, I did find a few of them, and I wouldn't say they were common, but they seemed possible. And then I felt like, especially when I was starting to join Project Zero, people would talk about them, you'd hear rumors, but there weren't a lot of good examples of them. And I might have been like even a little skeptical of their existence. You might remember we did the Project Zero prize. I can't remember how many years ago that was now, where we said we would give, I think it was $200,000 if someone found a fully remote bug in Android. And we did that just because like we really just wanted to see what one looked like. And we didn't get any entries for that. And then a couple of years ago, there was that Project Raven article where, it was maybe the first real, I wouldn't say real proof, but better documented proof that this type of bug really existed that we'd seen. So that was really what inspired Samuel Gross and I to start looking at the area. So we did for quite a while. We found this interface where basically they deserialize different objects in iMessage. And it's funny, Samuel, I think, is a much more methodical attacker than me. He came up with a list of like every interface, and then we both went through them.
Okay.
And we found a few that had quite good bugs in them. And I was surprised by that. But what the actual problem was, and there was a few, was so they had this whole plist interface where you could archive and unarchive different object types. And, most of them were reasonable, like arrays and strings. But then it turned out you could do this with every subclass of them. And also, it was not just like things you included. It was every subclass in every library that happened to be loaded in the memory space. So
space, yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge attack surface.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So we found memory corruption bugs, and then
I personally think that deserialization bugs are going to be keeping us busy for a decade or more. They're literally the buffer overflow of the 2020s, right? I think that we're that whole class of research about deserialization things. It's so intricate and complex that I think we're going to be digging through that particular area for a long time. Anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt. Tell me.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and I think so. Apple has done a lot to make this attack surface smaller now. For example, you can't include all the subclasses anymore, but I still think anytime you're deserializing something, it's a parser and it's a risk. So we found a few good bugs, and then Samuel wrote an exploit for one of them. And we did have a few good leak bugs, but we wanted to experiment with exploiting these bugs without an info leak. So Samuel did this thing where he sent like many messages to the device, and he could actually detect whether iMessage had crashed or not. And then based on that, he could map out the memory space. And it was really cool. And we had a working exploit.
Kind of like message fuzzing. Interesting. That's Do you think that, these sorts of things, once somebody sort of shines a light on them, everybody starts to scurry around and see where else this bug is? Do you think there's still much there? Do you think there's probably still worth the poking in that area a lot more? Are we going to see more bugs in those things? Or do you guys think you've mapped out most of it at this point?
Yeah, I don't think so, because just recently there was an in the wild bug found in another component of iMessage, which was image parsing. So I do think that
the routines that never fail to give dividends for security. Yes.
So I think that like this deserialization area is maybe producing less, at least in terms of remote exploits. Though I forgot to mention, before then, it wasn't uncommon for this interface to be used in local exploits. So, there's lots of places on iOS and Macs where they'll store a serialized object, for example, on the file system and deserialize it. So it wasn't completely unheard of, though I don't think it was clear at that point, how it was available on the remote attack surface. But I think, this plist thing will probably continue for a while, at least locally. But also, I think, this is the thing that really fascinates me. I'm sure, there's the ones that there's been ODAs found in, but there's also probably so many remote attack surfaces that just like no one has thought of yet, or maybe only, real attackers have thought of yet. And
I just didn't think of diddling this parameter and in this area because it leads to these. It's funny because Mark, when we did this thing with Mark Dowd, his crystal ball vision, and I'm going to ask you that in a little bit too, where the crystal ball vision about what kind of vulnerabilities we're going to get in the future. So I'll plant that seed. He said logic bugs. So he said that logic bugs are going to be the area that we're going to continue to work through, and those kinds of things. And I just nominated deserialization bugs, but I think that there's going to be, even with all the mitigations that we put into place, I think that we're going to have lots of different areas. So I'm going to ask you a little bit what you think is sort of where we're going with vulnerability research. But first, before I let you go, I want to rewind a little bit and talk about Webrtc, because I'm interested in are you guys still looking at attack surface? Because there seems to be, it's endlessly baroque. It's got so many little fiddly bits, as you probably know better than most people. And so it looks to me like it's going to be something we're going to be poking at for a long time. And we keep also adjusting it. And the coordinate is still shifting a lot as we were playing with video codecs, et cetera, whatever. And it's being applied in a lot of places. Tell me about Webrtc security a little bit. Is there any stories about that research, or what do you think it's going to go in the future?
That one I found in the browser and was pretty surprised to find that so many Android applications use it, including some very large ones. The ones I've done research on have been a Facebook Messenger and Google Duo. But yeah, there's tons of small apps, and yeah, often embedded, often not updated, and often a fully remote attack surface. Before the call gets answered, they'll start a connection where they're processing RTP packets and sometimes even codecs. So yeah, I was surprised by what a big attack surface that turned out to be. I do think there's a few things that will happen in the future. There have been some efforts to make it easier to update Webrtc and to remove some of the more error-prone interfaces. Those are ongoing, and if you look in the Webrtc code base, you'll see some of them. But I do think that at least is in the future, that I'm hoping that some of the worst problems will go away, and attackers will be stuck with the more difficult interfaces. But on the other hand, there continues to be new features, because video conferencing is such a popular feature, and it's what I kind of call like a razor's edge feature.
Yeah. That's a good name for it, actually.
Like everyone involved in video conferencing is constantly fighting to make it better, more efficient, use less CPU.
The new bell whistle. Now we have virtual frog backgrounds or whatever it is that okay. It's definitely going to be something that you can have to keep going back and revisiting. Are you guys still doing active research on it right now, or or is it kind of you found a whole bunch of stuff? Or what are you looking at in the future? And then we're going to get back to the crystal ball question.
Yeah, so I've been taking a bit of a break from Webrtc and basically looking at the other large applications that don't use it, which are FaceTime, WhatsApp, and Zoom. Those are kind of the three big ones that basically implement their similar features in their own codes. So I've been spending some time on that. And I think after that, I'm going to spend some more time on the iMessage remote attack surface, because clearly there is more there.
Have you gotten jiggy with WASM yet? That's sort of one area I've been looking at a lot too, for a bunch of things, Zoom, etc., being in it.
Yeah, so I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I took a brief look at WebAssembly. And at the time, I thought it was fairly robust, at least against memory corruption bugs, but I was fairly concerned that future features might change that.
So it has actually changed quite a bit in the last few years. They've fiddled with, in my opinion, gotten a little bit better, but now we're totally in the weeds. So let's rewind this and talk about kind of more higher level stuff. Where do you think the areas that we need to pay a lot more attention on in the future in terms of bug hunting, and what's going to be pay dividend for exploit writers, and what's going to be areas that people need to secure and really work on, in your opinion? And give us your crystal ball vision.
Yeah. So of course, I'm always focused on the areas I'm the most interested in. So this is going to be totally biased. But I think the future of the fully remote bugs is going to become interesting. And I think with Webrtc, you can think about the library, but I think the larger lesson there is, I feel like there's probably, many third-party libraries, many things we do to mobile applications that we don't understand yet that will lead to fully remote exploits. So I think that's, both something we'll probably see in the future and an area for more research. Because there's applications that even like I've spent some time on looking for other like fully remote attack surfaces, not in applications but on phones themselves. For example, a VoLTE or various services on the iPhone. And I haven't had much luck with that, but I feel like there are so many of them and so many apps. Yeah, I feel like there's probably going to be an explosion of the available attack surfaces before everyone starts clamping down on the attack surfaces. So I think this is probably a problem that'll get worse before it gets better.
I think that's probably a fair statement. I would strongly agree with that. Any closing advice for future bug hunters and vulnerability researchers?
Vulnerabilities want to be found. That's That's a bit of a joke, but I think if it's something that you're enthusiastic about or curious about, it's worthwhile just jumping in, learning how things work, and maybe you'll find something and maybe you won't. But I think you'll definitely learn something about security and about how systems work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Great, thanks.